Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Russ Dunning. So I got some good topics today to kind of hammer out, and some cool stuff in the news. I think is starting to bring healthcare up to more current level. People are talking about stuff and this and that. So yesterday, Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, weighed in, and they're passing a bill. They're looking to pass a bill to block the ability of venture capital firms to purchase healthcare organizations. And the thought process behind this, one of the challenges they face there is that there's a venture capitalist firm that owns a hospital, and they chose to close the hospital. And of course, the view of the city is that the hospital was a community resource, and it was there to serve the people and the population, and so everyone's concerned about people needing to give birth, and there's no place to go.
If you're sick.
Yeah, obviously sickness, obviously like some of the more significant emergencies, emergency department.
Catastrophic.
Yeah. One of the things they quoted was where the gunshot wound victim's going to go, Mm-hmm. So clearly this was more of like a community hospital serving some of the, less fortunate, a little tougher community probably of all. So it's an interesting take. And if you think about what this kind of regulation would do, or what this kind of ruling would do if this bill got passed to say that, okay, venture capital can't get involved in healthcare. It's just an interesting topic to kind of break down and really kind of follow the money and see where things go.
Yeah, it's I think there's a lot going on with the hospital, but I think when people think of a hospital, we shouldn't necessarily say it's like, well, that's part of the healthcare system. It's much more than that. It's a staple of primary medicine. So yeah, you think of the sick, you think of the injured, you think of, I need help now, I'm gonna go to the hospital. It's quite the opposite of, say, an elective procedure or an activity that's trying to better your health. I think in a hospital realm, you're trying to stop someone from dying. And I would call that primary care medicine. I think, the majority of the United States and probably a lot of other countries in the world, there's a little more of a socialist perspective when it comes to primary medicine. We tend to think that let's all give our money through taxes, and let's all have that collective money by the federal government and by the state government, and let's do things like firefighting, like to some degree, the ambulance system, and then to some degree, the hospital system as this primary service.
That came up, that idea of EMS, which I'd really like to learn a lot more about. I have to ask some of our fire relationships more and more about this, because that's a business. Yeah, the firefighters have paramedic services and have EMS as well, but most of the ambulance transport that actually goes to the hospital, the AMR and all those companies,
those are all private,
very lucrative private businesses.
Yeah.
That call them the same people.
Yeah,
very, very regularly at their homes that are struggling, that can't get out of bed or can't get off the floor, different things. Of course, they need the help, so it's fair, but it's kind of an everyday thing. If you talk to these guys, some of the paramedics and stuff, it's really quite crazy. And then to think that that person's not paying the bill, so that bill's getting transferred to Medi-Cal or Medicare, and it ends up as a tax.
Well, I think
it's a tax on those who pay.
It seems that primary care medicine, saving your life in the moment, let's not pretend like it's in 20 years, but in the moment we're going to save your life. There seems to be let's lift the entire community up with this base level care. Now there's plenty.
And this exists. This is real.
Yeah,
this happens now. So if the hospital is not allowed to not provide you health care to save your life. Mm-hmm. So if you were to go in a life-threatening situation to the ER, and whatever the situation was, we can provide insurance, can't provide insurance, whatever, they are required, and all of the ethics of all the providers that are on the floor are required to stabilize you and help save your life regardless of pay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this exists already in this country, as far as at least that level. Now, obviously not all the other levels, but that level does exist, that it's available.
Yeah. But what is not in this space is something, maybe we can call it performance medicine. We can call it longevity medicine. We can call it elective procedure. Yeah. Like I think classic example would be like a knee replacement. You don't need a knee replacement to save your life today. You're trying to better your life for tomorrow. It's a very different mindset. So we shouldn't blanket healthcare for both branches of catastrophic, I need your help right now to save the life, versus I want to live the longest and best life possible. These are very opposite sides of the healthcare spectrum. And I think more and more opportunity for good investment is living on the performance end. Think of like your Garmin watch or Apple Health. Think of an elective procedure. Think of biologics or stem cells. And that would be, I think a large part is the majority of outpatient physical therapy is not to save my life today, it's to better my life tomorrow. That's a very different mindset.
Yeah.
And so I can see that duality system. It's happening right now. And so the idea of stopping VC money at a primary medicine, level, it's almost like can a community purchase their own fire department or their own law enforcement?
Yeah.
And they can. Nothing is stopping. I don't think it's stopping.
Then managing that becomes a little bit dicey.
Sure,
but
sure.
if you let's just look at like business as a whole. So if you have venture capital, what venture capital typically does, they take something that's already working. So there's already a business that's been proven to be effective. It has some legs. It's moving in a certain direction. And then venture capital comes in and basically purchases the business, either all or some of it. And then they use their capital and their resources. So they usually have, really deep finance people, really deep HR people, and they build these operations in your finance around the business that you're operating. And then they take that and then they help you scale it. Now their incentive of scaling it is so that they can increase the profitability and make it bigger and then sell it for a greater margin or a greater return in the near future, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. So that's kind of what usually the goal of VC is. So the negative take for business is that VC will come in and purchase a business, strip it down and get rid of everything that doesn't work and only keep the profitable things, which we see as well. So obviously different VC firms have different strategies in the way they do things. That's what it's kind of designed to be. Now you have to, in order to understand like this conversation in the healthcare space, you have to understand some rules. So in the smaller private sector of healthcare, like individual doctors, obviously people like us, like physical therapy groups, chiropractors, whatever it is, any of those healthcare providers, it's illegal to run a business and not be the provider. So the funds of a healthcare business, like a physical therapy business, the funds that are generated from patient services cannot go to benefit someone who's not a provider. So in other words, if we have our team, if we were to bring in an investor or an owner into our group that was not a physical therapist, did not have a license in the state that you're operating, then it would not be possible for them to get any kind of distribution or any kind of funds from the revenue made from patient care dollars. Mm-hmm. So this kind of regulation already exists to do this. However, every single hospital and every single larger group uses a strategy of a management company, mm-hmm. and then service dollars are paid between a management company and the actual providers. So usually put the providers in a group and then there's a management company group. So what happens is the VC guys are coming in and buying the management company group, which obviously controls the flow, and then the providers are in a separate group so they don't have any influence on them. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the way it's usually set up. But obviously, if it's not making money, then they tend to cancel. But you have to understand that regulation. Then when you think about this question, like, okay, what if they did take the VC out? What VC does really well and has really done a lot of in PT, I don't know if it's been good or bad, we can weigh in on that, is they've really increased access, mm-hmm. because they've grown tremendously. Mm-hmm. Like the number of physical therapy clinics has grown tremendously. And that's been good. Is the quality of them better? Not necessarily, but I wouldn't say that they're making the quality any worse.
Yeah.
They're still giving the providers, all the tools and the access and the resources and making their jobs easier. The only thing that they'll tend to do is push them to see a higher volume of patients than they typically would like to, because it increases income.
Yeah. Well, I'd also say I would look at how they grew. And I think sometimes that growth can be like a bit, I don't know how to say it. Doesn't feel right.
It's a hostile takeover.
Yeah. I think the takeover could be, a purchase, mergers, but it also could be through contracts. If you have a group that has a unique contract, then they purchase that group and then scale it up, and everyone takes that contract now and so much of it is on the contracting front, which feels a lot like, well, who you know, and if you know someone inside the system, then you get your contract pushed through, and now you're the preferred provider that people have to go through for you, and it feels a bit dirty.
Yeah, I think one thing to think about if you're anti venture capital in this space and pro provider owned businesses, which is great. I mean, we are, so it's great. The problem with the regulation that the provider has to basically own the business or kind of be at the top end of the process is that if the providers are not necessarily great at business, that's not what they went to school for. Mm-hmm. It's not really what they're doing. And it's really, really hard to run a business. Like, it's actually much, much more difficult than the people would think. I mean, there's many, it's very, very challenging. So to say that you have to be a provider, go and do the patient care and run the business at the same time is extremely difficult, which is why we see a group of entities, like all the physical therapists, all the chiropractors in the country. There's so many like one-offs. Mm-hmm. There's so many small groups because it's really hard to get big because they don't know how to like organize systems and organize processes at a rate that maybe a business or a VC group does, where it comes very naturally to them. They're very familiar with the process and the steps to take, whereas a provider typically does not. So they typically kind of fall back on, I'm just going to stay small and do my thing, which people associate with high quality. But what we see, the reality is that's associated with very, very high burnout. So the amount of clinicians that stay in our profession is very, very low. So our burnout rate in 5 years it's a very, very high. It's like 30% or something like that. It's a pretty high number. We can double check that, but it's a really high number. So the amount of people that stay in the practice a long time is low. So the reason, why would you leave? Well, either because you're not making enough money, or the work is far too hard for the money that you're making. So you would choose to go to somewhere else where it's easier. Mm-hmm. So those are business problems. Mm-hmm. Those are operational problems where either you didn't set up an operating system that makes it easier on you, you weren't able to develop a team around you to be more efficient, and you weren't able to build and scale where you had other providers come in to share cost. Mm-hmm. So we know that healthcare is actually a good model. It's a good business, which is why VC wants to be involved in it, is because if you can reduce your overhead costs and you can consolidate and you can have a large group, you can do well. You can do as well as you could in other businesses in the world, mm-hmm. which is important, because if there's not a way to do well long term, then you end up with it won't exist. Yeah, the market will get rid of it, just like you see in everything else, in tech or anything else. Yeah. If people don't like a product, they'll stop buying it and they'll go get something else because it's not very good.
Well, then let's talk about what's competing in our space. In the elective procedures, outpatient physical therapy, you on one end you can have a strength coach, a manual therapist, a massage therapist, a personal trainer, and they can work outside the insurance system. And they might charge $1 a minute, they might charge $3 a minute, somewhere in between, and then they're able to do a lot of things. And on the other end, you have, say, a physical therapist that takes insurance, and people are paying into their insurance and they want to use it. Mm-hmm. And we're in this same industry trying to help someone's movement and health. Now we have different education levels, but we're still trying to do the same thing. So, in the end, when someone endures a stretch and they're on the table and they're showing what's wrong with their body and they do an exercise, that's something. And we're all kind of competing in this space. And when I think insurance can get really nasty here when they make it difficult to get a good reimbursement, or the reimbursement's just not fair. Say that number hasn't budged in 10 years, which is what we're up against. Yeah,
well, so that's interesting. There's actually quite a bit of, this is a great post on that topic about Medicare. So this guy did a 10-year study of Medicare, and he found that reimbursement was dropping. So as an example, to give an actual number, like something that we used to charge $30 for is now paying $27. So in 2015, it was paying $30.03 in this case. And then now if you were to bill that same code, you get paid $27.17. And that's pretty consistent up and down the ladder, where things went down about 3% mm-hmm. or so. Mm-hmm. So we've known that every year Medicare has been threatening to decrease reimbursement to healthcare providers. Many physicians have left the network because the amount of work you have to do to get paid, and then the amount you get paid is so low that it actually has become a deterrent, and they don't really want to to have to deal with all that work, all that bureaucracy, in order just to provide the care that they love to do every day. It doesn't make any sense. It starts to become a conflict. So, but what's interesting, this guy found on that statistic was when they looked at the Medicare, the rates dropped across the board for providers over the last 10 years. But if you worked at Medicare, so if you were a CMS employee, CMS is Center for Medicaid Services. So if you were a CMS employee in 2015, the average annual salary was $106,355. That's 10 years. So that's for in our field, that by far is $10,000 at least annually more than a physical therapist.
Beating the average. So the bureaucrat in the system is getting paid more than the service provider for the system.
That's the average salary. That's not even that's not even like necessarily one of the highest skilled people. That's that's not like a clinician or a doctor of some kind.
The average
just could be an admin role.
That you did not need a graduate level degree and license to be.
Right. Yeah. So in the meantime, as this since 2015, that was the number, was 106,000. In 2022, that number was 128,000.
Increased 25%.
18%. Went up 18%, about 2.5% a year.
So that follows inflation to a T. So 2.5%, 2.5%, 2.5%. That's going to follow inflation, but yet their fee schedule went down.
Yes. So it's a VC group. We're going to pay ourselves more, and we're going to pay out less to the people. That's how we can make more money, is that we'll actually not pay as much. It's really easy in insurance. Like you have a certain amount of collections coming in Medicare, they're taking in tax dollars, specifically dollars dedicated for Medicare, and they pay out less and they decrease on the payout. Well, that's it's very easy to do that math. You can make money doing that. Just like you would if you pay a Blue Cross premium and then Blue Cross decides to pay out less. Well, guess what? They made more money.
Yeah.
Or they chose to have expenses on something different, and maybe they can claim, well, we had to pay our employees more. Understandable.
Yeah.
So do the healthcare providers.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'm pretty sure the employees somehow contracted for the 2.5% inflation increase, but the physical therapists,
if it's a unionized thing,
we
sure.
didn't get to fight for our 2.5% increase as well. So
we had to fight. Actually, we had to hire lobbyists and everybody else you could think of to try to go slow this trend down and keep it as slow as you can. There's been millions and millions of dollars spent by the national governing bodies to go and try to slow that trend down. Every year, it's a deal. So just think about the thing to think about is all the regulation. It's a really interesting field where you have a privately owned entity operating, but it's regulated by who can own it. It's regulated by how much the reimbursement is by the insurance company. And now they're talking about adding more regulation about VC groups being involved, which I'm not necessarily a huge VC fan. I'm not saying that's the way to go, but it just seems like I don't think they were barking up the wrong tree here.
Yeah.
I think that what we have to do is go back to let's look at the insurance model, how it's actually paying for services, and let's look at how providers are operating, whether they be in hospital settings or in private settings. And then let's look at that model. It'd be much better than having like state by state regulations on that. Because I'm a free market guy where I think the people will decide. The clients, the patients, the end user of the product is going to decide if it's a good business or not. Yeah. And if the business grows and people like the service and they purchase more of it, then good. You're doing something good that's moving the needle. You're moving the community.
Yeah.
If the price point is too high, then people won't pay for it. And the price point has to match what they're willing to pay as well. So everything kind of works out.
Well, I think in every business we need a North Star. You need a North Star that says, is the business achieving its mission? And I do think if the mission is to prevent people from dying from gunshots or from severe illness, and you want to improve the whatever the life-saving metric that a hospital system would use, I think it's fair that our tax dollars need to do that the best we can. And if the metric is, for a business to thrive and foster top-tier pay for the service providers, i.e. physical therapists, in a physical therapy space that's outpatient, which means if someone's walking into the clinic, they're defining themselves as not dying today. at least. So, in the outpatient world, I'm going to call that all outpatient medicine is largely performance medicine. I'm trying to get better for a brighter tomorrow. I'm trying to walk more, trying to run more, trying to do more with my body. So it's on the performance side, which feels much more free market driven. So I think, if you're in a space where you just got to look at your model and then follow the money. And if the majority of that money is going back to the people that are providing the service, I think you're going to continue to find phenomenal service in a performance space, or a sports medicine space, or an outpatient space. And if whatever excess money there is, if it's going toward another group that can give a rat's ass on the mission and doesn't really understand what performance medicine or outpatient medicine or sports medicine is, then I think it's going to falter. I think it's going to falter because we learned a lot with the tech industry of the 90s and 2000s. What that did is it showed, hey, engineers, graduate from college, you're really smart. Here, we're going to foster top-tier pay with these elite programs that get you vested, that make you feel part of the company at a very deep level. And they showed that. And if that company grew, then the engineer grew. And so we're borrowing all of those models and putting them into a medicine space that's not saving lives, but definitely helping people in the performance space. So that's much more free market. If the business is doing the right thing for people and people enjoy it and they're coming back, it should flourish.
Yeah, I agree. I think, that always in the business, you got to follow the money. Where does the money end up? If it ends up in the hands of the providers, the providers are getting paid more, getting premium for what they do, then you're going to get a premium product because they're seeing the rewards instantaneously right away. I think from a modeling standpoint, I think that becomes the key is like, how are you going to provide value? So what is the value of the services that you gave? How do you organize that? And how do you organize that model? So what we've done is to really prioritize the patient and put the provider, put the smartest person in the room in front of the patient for the maximum amount of time possible. And what we hope to have happen when we do that is take a very, very educated person who's very passionate about helping the person in front of them, and then someone who comes in that can actually tell their whole story end to end and actually give a good context of what's going on. And then that clinician can come in and say, okay, I understand the story. I can do the test I need to do. We can differentiate this so we can come together and make a plan that works for you. Because it's also easy to make a plan to say, hey, everyone's had this happen if you've gone to PT. Someone gives you exercises and then you don't do them, you can't do them. The patient goes back and says, well, I didn't do those. Well, why not? And it's the craziest stuff. Like, well, that one I had to do on the ground and I have a dog. So every time I lay on the ground, the dog jumps on me. So I just stopped doing it. Like that's a real story, like multiple times a day. So it's like, all right, if you have a dog, we have to have a different strategy. Like, let's do it on the bed or let's do it in standing. We have to make modifications, which is what we're capable of. But it's really important to understand the person you're working with. If I just give you a sheet and you have limitations like that, one, you're probably not going to do it. You're certainly not going to see how it ties to you. And then three, you're going to be like, well, it's too hard for me to do, and it's not really not moving the needle, so I'm done.
Yeah. I don't know why as you're talking, I'm just thinking of like, a pediatric dentist, interacting with their patient, and the patient says, well, I don't have a toothbrush or floss. It's like, well, the buck stops here. So you have to do the activity. And what is the activity? Is it a standing activity? Is it a walking activity? Is it a strength activity? We have to make a change on the body, and the change doesn't happen in the 53 minutes that you're in this space. That's a start. That's a catalyst for change. That's one of many, but it has to be repeated for the body to change. And without that, what value do we have? So we have to create time to do the right activity, but we have to have the education of why it's important, and then be patient with that person, because it's going to take time for their body to change. I think that's the biggest thing is you look at a journey, like say you have back pain because your hip doesn't move and your thigh is tight and your back is weak and you get a funky rotation. You have like 3 or 4 things. Well, how quickly does it take for all that to normalize? Well, if you're weak, it takes at least several weeks to address a strength problem. If you're tight, well, the question would be, why are you tight? And it's probably because you are weak. So we're going to stretch that thing for the next few months. So it's almost like no matter what type of musculoskeletal problem you have, it's going to take several months to have a lasting change. And then we, as a service provider that creates value, we have to give an experience along that's meaningful and encourages the person to stick with it and to continue to adapt. And if we're not able to have touch points throughout that, say, 3-month cycle, then what are we even doing? If we're just lost in counting reps and, that was 48 minutes, that wasn't 37 minutes, or, our eyes are on the wrong thing.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so just to kind of recap that, I'm not saying that VC is bad, and I'm not saying that we should not regulate anything. I think we need probably both to have their place and are good things at times. But I definitely think the system is broken and has been so for quite some time. So we've got to some degree, go in there and blow it up and kind of start over. Because stuff that was built in the 70s and 80s is not necessarily what's available now. Like the amount of technology and things we can do, learn faster, work faster, more efficiencies allow us to do a lot more. And some of those regulations that were put in place a long time ago just don't make any more sense.
Well, every AI solution, every tech solution, it's going to come at an incredible cost. And I think that's one thing that VC does really well is they implement that efficiency and that innovation. And so if we're going to expect to innovate, it is amazing how somebody's in healthcare, you're like, how archaic is this system? We've all you've all been asked, what's your fax number? Like, talk about archaic. Like, the healthcare industry must be the only industry that still has a fax. That's how unfortunately archaic. And it's because of the lack of good smart money flowing into that is why it's been able to be stuck in archaic technology. And to climb out of that, it's going to take a monumental effort. And maybe VC is the wrong word, but I think the big tech and the big systems need to help. I think Google needs to help, and X needs to help, and Amazon needs to help and say, hey, we know you guys suffer on a lot of technology front. Here's the technology solutions that you need. So you don't need a fax number.
Yeah.
Here you can run a good business, and that's probably going to help all hospital systems.
I think that's the argument. It's like if a VC group or a tech business group is going to be very, very sensitive to like if a product works, if it's making money, if it's effective or not, and if it's losing and it decides to close down the operations, it's probably doing so for a reason that's not sustainable, right? It's suggesting it's not sustainable. So we need to go back and look at, are we fighting to keep things that are broken and unsustainable and to keep them around and it's going to cost us 2-3x of what they originally were? Or do we have to look at, better ways to do things? Are we stuck on something that we thought was the best way? Maybe there's better ways out there now, which there very well could be. There's so many other tools. Mm-hmm. On that note, so switching gears here a little bit, talking about, we're going to switch all the way to like return to play stuff.
Yeah, performance.
This is a new like study kind of talking about ACL return to sports. But it's this idea of efficiency and value, I'd say. This was put out there by Aspetar, which Aspetar is a group out of the United Arab Emirates, out of Abu Dhabi. Great hospital system. They've been trying for the last decade to promote themselves as like the world leader in sports medicine. And they have everything except all the athletes. But they have the docs, they have the research, they have the stuff. So Aspetar is a great group. They got a great journal. Obviously they're very well funded. Everything over there is. But anyway, interesting. I don't know how many people were in this study. I haven't had a chance to read the full thing, but I thought it was interesting. So we talk about return to sport being 9 months. So the ACL history is that, man, when it first came out, it was forever. It was a year to get back on the floor after you tore your ACL. And then it kind of moved as fast as 6 months. So kind of like when I was getting started, like in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, trying to get people back to sports at 6 months thought was good. We were calling it accelerated rehab and all this stuff. And it turns out that there was more reoccurrences of re-tears during that period than otherwise. During this period, the surgical techniques were also changing. Grafts were changing. That before it was just patellar tendon bone. Then I went to like hamstring and patellar tendon bone and different things, cadaver grafts, different things. So there's been progressions. Now all the graft stuff is stabilized quite a bit. The new quad tendon graft is just a few years old. But that seems to be pretty stabilized. But the technique has gotten way better. The technology to do the technique has gotten way better, which is massive in our industry. That is a massive factor. Anyways, the data here suggests that no association between return to play at 9 months to new injury. So they looked at people that returned prior to 9 months and then an equal amount of re-tears as those that returned after 9 months on this particular study. they looked at some other things that I hadn't really seen reported as much before that I thought were pretty interesting. So if the person went through rehab and had good adherence to the rehab, they didn't exactly finish, but they had good adherence. So they participated actively. They were 4 times more likely to return to a pivoting required sport without incidents. So 4 times more likely to get back to pivoting motions, which is usually where the tear occurs.
Pivoting is in pretty much every sport out there.
Yeah. So yeah, except for like track.
Yeah.
But if you're like playing tennis, soccer, basketball,
if you're making the turn at the 200,
but
some rotary forces.
Yeah, you can argue. You probably can't land very well in like a long jump or something.
So we're talking the 100.
But if we're going straight ahead, for the most part, I think you could make that turn okay. We've seen it happen many, many times. But it's definitely better to have one if you have an ACL if you intact to run the turn.
Got it.
Okay. Now this one is interesting. So if you actually finish the rehab, this is the word if you finished, you were 6 times more likely to return without incidents.
Oh.
So that was pretty good. And then if you stopped in the early stage of rehab, you only had a 50% chance of making it back to sport. If you stopped in the mid stages, you had a 70% chance of making it back. But if you went all the way to the finished stages, you were 90% to make it back to the prior level of function.
So the first chunk is more is better. But the second thing you said is more PT is better. But the first thing you said is there was no difference in those who went back before 9 months or after 9 months.
So time does not seem to be the factor. Participation seems to be the factor.
Voila. So for all those medical people that say, give it a year and that ACL will be able to tolerate a lot, that's not science.
Yeah. So there's obviously some physiology around like the graft healing and maturing and such that we see better physiology looking at 9 to 12 months, but it's pretty darn good at 5, 6 as well. But it definitely matures and gets better as time goes on. So there is science on that, but the data in this particular study is starting to suggest that we've known this for a long time, that time is not the variable.
Right. It's work.
Yeah. It's work, which is a very general statement to say if you just did the rehab, it doesn't say if it's good or bad.
Yeah.
If you were just with a coach working on the rehab, 6 times more likely to return back if you finished, which and the percentage of that is about 90% of the people.
Yeah.
Were able to return back, which is awesome. Versus if you dropped out early, 50% made it back or 70% made it back if they dropped out in the mid stages. So I think the idea is just being with some level of coaching is what this is suggesting is better than nothing. And then we've taken this to another level to say like, okay, what if we actually looked at your force plate data and your landing metrics and your hop testing and these different variables, and then we even take that 90%. Let's make that then 100. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Well, I'm trusting there that the majority of surgical technique these days, current status is excellent, and I think 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was a lot of perhaps variability because the technology was changing so much. Yeah, I mean, they started really using the scope in the 90s. So if you were a surgeon, trained in before the 90s, you probably were opening everything up. And then they went to the scope like in the late 80s, early 90s, where that really took off. But if you weren't trained on that, even into the early 2000s, you could have been a 35-year-old surgeon in 1985. And in 2005, you're only 55 years old. You're in your prime. Yeah. But you didn't really learn how to use the scope. Well, which is massive. I mean, that'd be like switching me from being right-hand dominant to left-hand dominant. I mean, it's it's an insane ass. Well, tell me what you've noticed on this, because I feel like I've met plenty of people where their knee was completely opened up, old school ACL rehab in the 90s, and they did well. Yeah. And then I have another cohort that got arthroscopic in the 2000s, and they needed a second and a third. So do you think there was like a phase of just like the initial phase of the arthroscopic ACLs that the ACLs were too straight, they were too linear, they were too much rotation, it was one line, it wasn't curved, they weren't anchored really well? Was it just like a pretty messy phase? 1,000%. I think that we were all really excited about the ability to do it with less collateral damage, but there's been a lot of maturation in technique over that, like from 2000 to 2020. There was a huge maturation in technique. So graft angle was a huge thing. Everybody wants to talk about graft choice. Graft choice is, as we've talked about on this before, is not a massive deal. Graft angle is huge. So if the angle is linear versus more of an angle so it can resist force in line,
is a massive factor. And then, of course, other things like bone bruising and getting in and getting out clean with surgery, not having a lot of collateral damage. The ACL doesn't tend to have a ton of collateral damage because it's pretty easy to access. Doesn't have a lot of muscular tissue like around it that's a problem. So, yeah, but I think there's a tremendous variability there. Getting the tunnels right, getting the tunnel placement right. Now the angles of the tunnel are different. They're using a drill now that has a flexible head. So instead of like, if you have a drill at home and you're going to drill a drill bit hole, it's like a straight only is the only option out there. But with surgery now, this thing has like a floppy head, so you can actually, it can be going straight, but you can angle it over like 30 degrees to the left and just push straight on and it will drill 30 degrees to the left. So they can get into tighter windows and like make angles in a way that they couldn't do before. They just run a guide wire through and then they have the drill follow the guide wire, and it's incredible. Well, I think that's dramatically changed outcomes.
Well, regarding this very specific niche, because it's so dependent on the innovation and technology around ACL reconstruction, it does seem like, we look at research 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now they're going to show different things because you're looking at a different, you might be looking at ACL recon, but different methods and different, so it's pretty exciting that like current ACL research right now done with modern methods shows it's really about putting in the work, and you have a phenomenal ability to return as long as you stuck with the program.
Yeah, I think that there's less about time and more about quality of work, which is what we all would want to hear, right? We'd all want to hear that, hey, if I put in the work and I work super hard, I can get there faster maybe than somebody else. There's other factors too that, this is suggesting that work was one of the factors, but I can promise you there's genetic factors, and I think it's a big thing how you started. I think, if you hurt the knee or any surgery, if you get hurt and you have surgery relatively quickly, I think you have less loss, so you have less atrophy and such, so it's faster to get back. If you hurt your knee and then you don't walk on it for 2-3 months, and then you have the surgery, and then you still can't walk on it for another month or two very well, now you're 5 months out, 5 months of atrophy, and then you're rebuilding that. You're working against a massive deficit, a huge hole you have to climb out of. But if you look at the pro guys like Jason Tatum, like a week ago on his Achilles, obviously Achilles is usually repaired right away anyway, but this guy went from like on the ground to having surgery the next day.
Yeah. And you have to appreciate his hormonal profile in that moment was probably phenomenal. His blood,
the best shape
phenomenal.
Of his life.
Yeah, best shape of his life.
Yeah. Everything. Testosterone levels high, all blood quality is high, oxygenation, everything's amazing.
Yeah.
Tip top, perfect shape.
Yeah.
And then, now he's a week out of that and he's already, I'm sure doing great things because the blood flow, circulation, all that stuff's there. He's going to heal like amazing.
Yeah.
But if you put that thing dormant for, even a week, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you try to operate on it, you're working against yourself. And I think this is really true. Like we haven't talked a lot about like back stuff here because we spend so much time talking about sports, shoulders and elbows and knees, but I think the back is the most recent transition of this. We've gone to like 10 years ago for sure, I would not have recommended someone to have back surgery. It would, if you literally couldn't walk, pain down the leg so bad, going on for like 6+ months, I'd probably say it's a consideration. And I would always have said this: if the MRI matches your symptoms, like if you have L5 distribution pain and you've got a nerve that's being compressed at L5 and you can see it on the image, then that's probably the time to have surgery, right? But nowadays, I would still say I would still give the same advice, but my hesitation to do it is far different. In the last 5 years, the technology and the way they've been able to go in and redo back surgery is absolutely, it's mind-blowing. So if you're like a patient and you've got a friend who had back surgery like 10 or 20 years ago, and you're like, man, they're terrible. They said never let anybody touch your back. Like that's just ancient history. Like the new stuff that's out, the new technology, the new surgeons, their knowledge base, the way it's unbelievable. We had a guy who literally we'd been rehabbing him for the last 7 months or so, since about October. He kind of started having stuff come on in August in his leg. He'd had a back injection like 25 years ago. Had done really well. Was water skiing competitively still. He's like 65, competitive water skier. Heli skis, really active skier, and water, snow, doesn't matter. And started having this stuff coming into his leg. Ended up getting a little bit of drop foot, like a really mild drop foot. So we quickly kind of got him moving in the right assessment pathways. had a little bit of sciatica pain. We were able to neutralize it a bit. Tried prednisone for a week, knocked it down a bit, started to creep back. Then they moved into, they saw there was a disc bulge that was impinging on the nerve, so they injected it, which helped tremendously. Not right away. It took about a week or 10 days. Helped tremendously for about 2-3 months. That started to wear down. So they were scheduled him for surgery to go in and do a microdiscectomy. And then they injected him again to give him a little more time because he had some big trips and stuff he wanted to do, it worked better, but not as good as the first one. But he was like waking up in the morning after only sleeping like 5 hours. Tough dude, because he's waking up because of pain. And he had to spend like anywhere from an hour to 2 hours moving in the morning. And he had his own like gym, so he'd go through all his routine and all this stuff just to get moving. And then throughout the day is pretty good. The more he moved, the better off he felt. So he did pretty well. But yeah, right now he's 2 weeks post-op on a microdiscectomy, and he's had zero pain since the first day.
Wow.
He's taken zero pain meds. His drop foot is absent completely.
Wow. And
the amount of times I've seen people nowadays in the last 2 years that have gone from that situation where like, this is not good. You would need to do something, but a surgery seems extreme. But then they go in there, in and out, and then man, life is totally turned back around. Like they just got 5 years back.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Awesome.
Have you seen it? Have you had that much?
With the back, me personally, I haven't seen as much surgery. I've seen a little more of the neck. So I've seen phenomenal neck fusions and disc replacements. Phenomenal. Yeah. Full return. I've had pro jiu-jitsu guys get back. I've had pro fighters get back. I've had athletic people.
It's moving. It's moving like towards like a total hip situation where like the amount of rehab needed is significantly less. Outside of the fact that there's so much atrophy and loss going into it because it's been going on for years.
Yeah.
But like getting the motion back or getting the pain down is like a non-factor.
Yep.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's kind of it's almost easier than a rotator cuff repair.
Yeah. Which have gotten amazingly good as well.
True.
Like the amount of pain with a rotator cuff compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The range of motion that they can get through very early on, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Not to say that you should push these things, but I think it's really important as a clinician, if you're new to it, this stuff used to be really hard. Well, the healing process was much more dramatic, and it shows that either there was collateral damage or, they just wasn't able to get in and out as clean, and the repair qualities weren't as good as these guys are able to get now.
Well, I think this goes right back to how we started the conversation. If you're going to find a surgeon, you need to find a surgeon that has a feedback loop of excellence. So if they're in private business, do they have a successful business model? Because the only way that works is if they do good surgery and the word spreads. It's the only way. If they work within a bigger system, is the system pride itself on excellence? And I'm thinking of Stanford, UCSF, some big name system that you'd have to be amazing to work in the system, or are you in more of the general market, held captive by customer reviews? That means you have to do great work and connect with the community in great ways for you to find success. And I think both ways have a feedback of excellence, or you're not good enough yet, you have better work to do. And so I think very highly of the orthopedic surgeons and of the injection doctors that are either in both camps of finding a team of excellence or finding a group of excellence where the feedback is real.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, whether it be a private practice where the financial incentive is to do well and to serve the community in that way, or if it's an elite center where just being on the team you're held accountable to a higher standard, are huge markers of.
Not to say that's only where success is. But,
not at all.
Yeah.
But it's easier to find there.
Yeah, I think, we have a lot of patients within Kaiser, and I point them in a particular route. Go to these doctors; they're phenomenal within that system, and I feel very good that those doctors have also worked hard at developing their name, and I think regardless, if the name is known in the community for excellence, they've done their work.
Agreed. Well, and Kaiser puts a lot of money back into their providers. I mean, they actually channel those guys get paid really well. Everybody talks about people don't really leave Kaiser, which is a sign to say that like there's value for them to stay. They still get the freedom to do what they want to do. I think for the most part, it's the model has evolved significantly. I think people could have complained about it a lot more, 15, 20 years ago, but I think the model's evolved very well to be a solid provider as a whole. Hey, thanks for watching the KIMEcast. Thanks for listening in. If that touched anything for you, if you have any comments, please feel free, throw it in the comment section. We'd love to connect with you guys and hook up offline.